What would Earth be like without the moon? Chapter 1. Night without a lantern. On a moonless Earth, the only Earth we would have ever known, night falls like a true frontier. There is no familiar disk hanging above the fields to soften edges and reveal footpaths in silver. There is only the spangled wilderness of the sky and the thin, fragile lamps we lift against it. Under a sky unclaimed by a companion, every shadow feels older, every star closer, every creature more honest about what it means to be small. Picture, first, an evening beside a sea that has never learned the word tide as most of us know it. The waves comb the shore with solar rhythm, gentle, clock-like, restrained, answering the distant pull of the sun alone. No spring tides surge to swallow the dunes, no neap tides retreat to unveil labyrinths of kelp and stone. The line between land and ocean is steady enough to tempt villages closer, to invite harbors without breakwaters, to braid cities straight into the water's edge. Children grow up never knowing the thrill and fear of a storm tide wringing the coast like a cloth. Fishermen count on winds and currents, not the moon's quiet metronome, and the beach is not a living calendar, no regular once a fortnight reshaping, no tide pools glimmering like laboratories for new worlds. You notice it most in the dark. On such an Earth, the word night means something sturdier. The night owns itself. No lantern drifts overhead to lend borrowed light to hunters and thieves, to foxes and owls. The galaxies emerge unabashed, a river of cold fire. Meteor trains linger. The dark is an element, like salt or iron. Animals grow bolder in its deeper shelter. Others learn to fear it. The human eye, sculpted by 1,000,000 generations beneath bare starlight, grows more understanding of faint things, a slight movement in brush, a smudge of cloud, the delicate suggestion of a path made by feet and hooves. People fill their ceilings with constellations because there is no single bright companion to monopolize the sky. Poets lean on Venus and Jupiter, on Orion's belt and the Pleiades, not on a changing face that would never have existed. If there is a myth of origin, it is not a story of a great light torn from Earth's belly by collision, circling in penance and love. In our moonless chronicle, there is only the young Earth, ardent and solitary, cooling under an unshared sky. Whatever giant impact never happened, the debris never haloed and never grew into a companion. The planet turned fast, a dervish of stone and water, and nothing tugged steadily at its spin to slow the days into our beloved 24. The sun still raised tides, the wind still combed heat from day to night. The continent still slid on the slow fever of the mantle, but the long lullaby of the moon was never sung. What would it feel like to live here, on the planet that did not inherit the moon's discipline? You would sense it in the clock of the day. The rotation is different, not catastrophically, not enough to rip forests from their roots, but unmistakably faster than the placid rhythm our history would have given us with a lunar break. Perhaps a day bears fewer hours. Perhaps the descent toward longer days proceeds slowly, unhurried by a partner's drag. Work and rest shape themselves to clocks trimmed of minutes, to more frequent sunrises, to evenings that arrive like sparrows rather than swans. Night's darkness is deeper, but it also arrives more often. Children count dawns the way we count breaths, and you would sense it in the seasons, not just in their pattern, but in their caprice. Our axis, without the moon's steadying presence, has a more nervous hand. Earth still tilts, of course. A planet is a gyroscope pretending to be a world. But the degree of tilt, the quiet angle that paints summer and winter, is less faithful across geologic time. Where our true Earth holds close to a habit, leaning about 23.5 degrees and precessing like a top. The moonless Earth feels other obeisances, to the giant planets that stalk the outer dark, to the subtle handshake of orbital resonances, to the small sloshing of mass in ice and ocean. Sometimes the tilt amplifies, sometimes it retreats, and it does so over spans of time long compared to empires but short compared to continents. If you could watch the planet's posture in a time-lapse of millions of years, you would see it bow and straighten, a dancer learning and unlearning the same old step. Climate, then, wears a less obedient face. Regions familiar with 4 clean seasons might inherit 6 or 3, or a cycle that favors long, gentle summers punctuated by abrupt, theatrical winters. In other eras, the poles bend toward the sun until the high latitudes bask in months of a light that never softens, while the equator grows surly with storms. The story of climate on such a planet is not a single narrative arc, but a suite of novellas, stable enough to paint forests and ice sheets, restless enough to revise maps of habitability over the ages. Creatures adapt, extinctions write their rough laws. Survival is always a skill, never a birthright. Return to the sea. The coastal world thrives, but differently. Without the moon's signature, the great intertidal stage loses some of its choreography. No ordinary fortnight is bookended by those tidal maximas that drag mats of seaweed ashore and parade armies of crabs. The rhythm is simpler, driven by the sun's steady pull. Organisms still find timing in temperature, day length, and the push and pull of weather systems, but the bulk of evolution's experiments happen in slightly calmer shallows. Fewer cliffs are undercut by tidal tantrums. Fewer salt marshes are sculpted into arabesques by nightly floods. Estuaries favor grasses that do not need to shrug off a tide's full scouring. Some creatures that on our moon-born coast cue their breeding to the full and new corals pulsing in unison, grunion racing the surf, must rely on subtler clocks. They shift to the sun-day's timing, to the taste of minerals in the water, to pressure changes before storms. They do not fail to exist. They exist in other forms. The deep ocean, impartial to the theater of the shoreline, notices in a quieter way. The monstrous tides that our moon would have encouraged are absent. There is less gravitational kneading in the planetary interior and its shells of ocean, but currents still roam. Winds drive gyres with strict patience. The equator and the poles still quarrel and barter heat. Over centuries, the ocean's archives fill with the languages of climate. Thermohaline circulation plies its slow caravan routes, carrying winter's cold into the tropics and summer's warmth into the deep. The ocean is always a negotiator. In a moonless Earth, it negotiates a little more gently, with fewer dramatic ultimatums. Step inland. In the forests, where moonlight would have silvered leaves and stitched a second paler day into the night, the understory learns a different grammar. Predators that on our Earth prowl darkness lit like a dim hallway must hunt by starlight and scent alone. Prey species that once feared a too bright night now feel bolder, their silhouettes swallowed by the dark. The owl's face is still beautiful, a dish of feathers tuning silence into information, but its schedule is less comfortable. Felines refine patience into a technology. Bats lean even harder on echolocation and on the brighter winds of dusk and dawn. Fireflies look like embers shaken from some unseen forge, and because there is no glaring companion to compete with them, villages hold festivals during their brief, incandescent season that feel like worship. The human body, threaded with circadian genes that once learned to negotiate the phases of a moon, still keeps exquisite time. But our calendars are simpler. Without a moon, the month is a fiction we never write into law. Our languages build a different set of words. We tether the year to the sun alone. Weeks are inventions of habit rather than echoes of lunar quarters. Agriculture listens solely to the length of the day and the bellwether of birds. Fishermen do not speak in the tongue of spring tides and neaps. They talk about wind regimes, water temperature, the breath and bones of the sea. The calendar is a machine with fewer gears, less redundant perhaps, but also less likely to slip. And those parts of our culture that on a lunar earth crystallize around the moon, prayers, poems, lullabies, lovers' phrasings, crystallize around other things here. The evening star stands in for a light that never lived. Saturn's rings hang like a god's discarded jewelry in the winter sky. And children grow up recognizing their faint ovality because telescopes are common on rooftops. We learn to recite the names of the bright stars the way you might recite the names of saints. Tides of human feeling move as ever, but the moon is not their chief metaphor. We learn to say the heart's weather instead of the pull of the moon, and we are not poorer for it, only different. If you were to ask a farmer on this earth about the seasons, they would tell you 6 stories. About the short wheat season when the sun lingers but does not burn, about the storm season that the ocean sends inland by courier, about the great quiet months when night is colder and the sky speaks in metal. In a different epoch, they might tell you only 4 stories. With different characters, the angle of the planet's lean is a master storyteller, and here the tale changes a little more often across the eons. Whole civilizations might rise in latitudes that later grow unfriendly and bequeath their cities to grass and sand. Our maps have a sense of mortality. Sail north on this earth, toward the edge of the world where ice teaches light to be merciless. In some ages, the polar caps are demure, in others, they are arrogant. When the tilt amplifies, summers at high latitudes are a delirium, a bath of day that bleaches language. Forests surge, then retreat before winters that return meaner. Animal migrations flex. There are centuries when auroras rage, not just at the crown of the planet, but spill toward its brow, bright banners in an unshared sky. Without the moon to wash out faint splendors, the curtains of green and purple are indecently visible. Sailors navigate by them as one navigates by lighthouses, choreographing routes to coincide with nights where the sky is not only a map, but also a torch. Eclipses, in our history, never became cathedral events. There are no great stones aligned to catch the bite of a vanished sun, because the bite is never neat here. There is no companion to draw a clean black coin across daylight and make scholars out of shepherds. Children still learn the geometry of shadows. They hold up their hands so that the sun's light traces their fingers onto the dirt, and they understand that the universe works with straight lines and ellipses. But no sudden twilight at noon ever converted entire nations into astronomers for a breathless 2 minutes. How could it? The sky is a stage without a co-star, yet in the absence, the world finds fullness. Ask the geologists what the lack of a lunar partner means beneath your feet, and they will talk about stress and relaxation in the crust, about the slight, slow flexing that on our Earth the moon abets. Without that flexing, some shallow earthquakes never happen. Some are driven more by the sun. Some of the fissures at the bottom of the ocean play a different rhythm. The grand convulsions, subduction, mountain building, continents slipping like plates under a tablecloth persist. The planet's appetite for change is largely appetites of mantle and heat, not of companions. Volcanoes do not ask the moon's permission. Ask the biologists, and you will hear a catalog of novelties. On our lunar Earth, many species cue their lives to that monthly light curve, spawnings that erupt on quiet nights, mass emergences calibrated to the soft brightness of a full disk, nesting cycles that whisper to an old sky clock. Here, the sky clock is different. The dossier of environmental cues still bulges: temperature thresholds, the humiliating accuracy of dawn and dusk, the signature of rainfall, the iron taste of a storm. Life is adaptable. It will wear any clock that keeps good time. Some creatures that rely on tides do not exist. Others occupy their niches with different strategies. Mangroves pattern themselves to winds and river pulses, not to tidal breathing. On beaches, waves fall with a calmer gait, and the jagged pact between sand and sea is negotiated more slowly. Ask the storytellers. They will say that in a world without a moon, you cannot mourn what you never had. They will tell you that cities learned to build taller sooner because the night was always dark enough to need more light. They will say that romance learned to lean harder on the rain and the smell of cut grass to carry its meanings because the sky lacked a coin to pass to lovers like a secret. They will insist that we became more cosmopolitan earlier, that the stars forced a greater humility, a broader astronomy. The first philosophers made their bones on an unadorned sky, one that did not offer stages of a nearby world to diagram and name. When they wanted to teach change and recurrence, they pointed to the seasons and to the sun's march. For the faithful, Sunday was exalted not because a moon taught us the cadence of sacred time, but because the sun did. The absence of a moon also writes into the earliest chapters of life's script, one of the plausible laboratories for life on our Earth, the intertidal zones with their wet-dry cycles. Their concentration of chemicals and foam looks different here. The stage is still viable, but the props are not as dramatic. Perhaps life instead finds more fertile rehearsals in hot little ponds nourished by volcanic gases, or in the pores of rock where hydrothermal fluids riddle chemistry with opportunity, or in desert basins where the sun itself, in its steady tyranny, performs the duty of concentration and dehydration. The universe is not stingy with laboratories. It does not need the moon to invite life to try itself. There is something else, a quiet physics that changes the planet's story in background ways. On our true Earth, lunar gravity exerts a torque that helps stabilize axial wobble and speeds up the precession of the spin axis. Remove that torque, and the precession relaxes. The top spins but slowly changes the direction of its spin axis, like a dancer who no longer has a partner to constrain their steps. Over deep time, that can matter. The way sunlight arranges itself on continents where winters accumulate ice, where summers refuse to melt, it depends not just on the tilt, but on the timing of the tilt relative to the planet's slow path around the Sunday. The orchestration of ice ages becomes a new symphony. Some cycles are softer, some crescendos more fierce. Glaciers still grow and sulk and retreat, but their politics are different, their treaties written to different beats. Stand, finally, in a city at the edge of evening. The skyline is the jagged last sentence of a language invented by steel and ambition. Street vendors unsheath their lamps. A distant tram hums like an insect. There is a celebratory feeling in the first switch thrown. This is a species that long ago decided it would not accept the terms of the dark. Without a moon to compromise, without a nightly visitor to grant us a gift of half-light, We took it upon ourselves to write light into the contract. Architects designed courtyards to trap the last of the day and surrender it slowly. Musicians scheduled concerts to begin at nautical twilight, when the sky is blue steel and there is no rival in the heavens. Parents teach their children the constellations early because the sky deserves it. Photographers keep 2 sets of lenses, one for day and one for star-studded night. And they speak about exposure not with the tired comparison to moonlight, but with the fresh grammar of the Milky Way. And yet, in the museums, there are rooms where the idea of a moon pure fiction has been borrowed by artists and mathematicians to make a point. Painters hang white circles in their canvases like perfect wounds. Poets stain their stanzas with the words borrowed light as metaphor. In schools, a thought experiment is taught with the solemnity of a parable. Suppose, the teacher says, there were a nearby world, large enough to see by eye. Suppose it circled us once every, say, 27 days. Suppose its gravity massaged our seas, and its phases taught us patience, and its sudden interpositions over the sun made entire nations gasp. How would our lives change? The students argued gently about calendars and art and predators and lovers. They do not miss this hypothetical thing. They use it as a lens to examine what already is, because what already is abundant. An earth without the moon is not an earth without wonder. It is a stage with a different lighting design, a different score. The performers are still capable of genius. It is a planet that passes the chalice of light from sun to star without a middle intermediary, and because of that, the night is prisoner to no single coin. In the deserts, nomads walk by a sky so intricate it feels like brain coral. In the tropics, rains come like applause. In high latitudes, summers are opiates, winters are operas. In every latitude, people tell stories to make sense of change of ocean edges that do not climb as high, of seasons that sometimes fracture and sometimes fuse, of the way a planet tilts when no familiar witness is present. And if, once or twice in a lifetime, you find yourself holding a newborn on a porch at the edge of a town and the dark slides down fully, the kind of dark that makes you believe in first things you will feel for the moon, not as a loss, but as the outline of a possibility. You will look up and see a theater without a headliner, 1,000 minor luminaries gathering strength, and you will understand that absence can be a style of abundance. The child in your arms will grow up learning a world tuned to other rhythms, solar, stellar, terrestrial. They will not ask what was taken, they will ask what is offered. And the answer will be this: a planet wholly itself, a night that belongs to the stars, a sea that speaks in gentler syllables, an axis that writes many stories across deep time, a humanity that learned to be its own lantern. The thought experiment ends where life begins, with adaptation, with culture, with the simple bravery of living under a sky that grants no favors. On such a world, you would still love, still build, still lose, still sing. You would stand on a breakwater and hear the low voice of a sea never bullied by a nearby body. You would lie on a hillside and watch meteors burn their signatures into the atmosphere. You would point out Venus to a friend who has never cared and see their face soften into belief. You would, in short, inhabit an earth that is not lesser, but other one that never learned the moon script and so wrote its own. Chapter 2. The long, slow consequences. Begin where the patient sciences begin. With time so long your mind has to walk it like a coastline, counting bays and headlands and losing count. On a moonless earth, the deep machinery of change still turns, plate boundaries grind, volcanoes write smoky diaries, continents wander in their dream of reunion, but all of it is tuned by a planet that never learned the moon's steadying hand drums. To understand such a world, lift your eyes from tonight's sky and step into centuries, millennia, millions of years. What you will see is not catastrophe. You will see 1,000 small differences accumulating into different histories. The first difference is a clock. The moon, had it existed, would have been a break on our spin, a hand lightly squeezing the shoulder of a whirling dancer. Without that hand, Earth turns a little faster for a little longer. Day length still lengthens, as tides raised by the sun and by the atmosphere itself rub away rotational energy, but the process is stingier. Imagine a civilization whose earliest chronicles tell of days slightly shorter than yours, dawns that arrive a little more often, evenings that flicker through the calendar like a heartbeat rather than a bell toll. The difference does not make or unmake empires, but it whispers into the design of every daily thing: how long ovens hold heat, how shepherds judge pasture, how prayer and ledger and lullaby parse the passage of light. The second difference is posture. A spinning world carries itself with a tilt. That tilt is the painter of seasons. On our lunar Earth, a large companion helps keep the tilt within modest bounds across geologic time, even as it wobbles like a top. On a moonless Earth, the tilt wanders more freely under the combined chidings of other planets and the sun's own torque. The numbers are not apocalyptic. They are humanly invisible, yet history-shaping changes unfolding over millions of years that shift the balance of ice and forest, monsoon and drought, savanna and steppe. There are eras when the axis leans more proudly into the sun, graduating temperate zones into flamboyant seasons and pushing tree lines poleward. There are quieter eras when the tilt is demure and the planet wears milder stripes. The ice sheets answer in their slow, crushing grammar. The ocean circulation, that tireless merchant of heat, reroutes. In some epochs, the north becomes a larger book, and the equator a smaller one. In others, the script reverses. None of this is doom. It is choreography. Stand at a shoreline fledged with reeds. On our true Earth, the moon rolls great breaths through the sea, sculpting the intertidal as a grand performance twice each day. Here the coast inhales and exhales more gently, to the sun's metronome. The daily vertical range is smaller. The spring and neap punctuation is mostly absent. If you have ever watched the tide retreat like a stage curtain to reveal galleries of starfish and eelgrass, to trap fish in jewel box pools, to draw crabs into ridiculous parades, know that on a moonless Earth, those galleries are narrower, those parades rarer. Yet the sea does not grow still. Winds, currents, and storms remain bold editors. Estuaries still braid sweet and salt. Mangrove roots still cradle nurseries. Kelp forests still ladder light into emerald cathedrals. The difference is less in spectacle than in schedule. Life that elsewhere sets its watch by lunar gravities, here consults other clocks. Coral spawns can tune to temperature and day length. Beach spawners can read barometric margins and the tactile language of waves. Evolution is a practical poet. It writes new rhymes. Those rhymes echo inward. Fewer nights washed in moonlight mean deeper darks, darks in which nocturnal animals refine their instruments. Prey lean into camouflage and stillness. Predators hone patience and smell. Owls keep their parabolic faces, yet learn to work the hinge hours harder, sluicing dusk and dawn with precision. Bats, long the masters of night, become even more sovereign, their echolocation netting insects in theaters of intense shadow. Fireflies are promoted from delight to doctrine. The fields they ignite teach children the curve of a season and the idea that nature speaks in signals, not just objects. Poets do not compare faces to the moon. They compare them to frost on barley, to the bright river of the Milky Way, to the soft, flammable glow of 1,000 beetle lanterns. Cities adapt early. Without generous moonlight, people fetched fire into the alleys sooner, raised glass spheres on iron stems, polished mirrors to cast brightness where fear collects. Architects carved light courtyards into urban blocks, planned streets to harvest the last wash of twilight. Night markets grew not from romance with a silver companion above, but from the practical arithmetic of need versus dark. When electricity arrives, it carries less argument. The contract with night was never softened by a neighbor's lamp. Street lighting becomes municipal poetry. Photographers perfect fast emulsions earlier. Astronomers, unbothered by a lunar washout every fortnight, catalog faint things in profusion. The catalogs grow fat with nebulae that are not nebulae but galaxies, with variables that beat faintly, with comets that can be tracked to the edge of the visible. The sky, lacking a bright bully, trains more eyes in the art of seeing. Calendars simplify and deepen. No months, or rather, months that are human inventions, not inheritances. Where different cultures might have once braided lunar and solar cycles into lunisolar tapestries, leap months and sacred nights anchored to a face that waxes and wanes here. The loom is simpler and more various. Some civilizations cleave the year into 10 equal hands of days and festivals. Others measure agricultural time in named spans tied to monsoon and dry, to sowing and first flood. Weeks are pure culture, not the fossil of quarter phases. The very names we would have given to time are different. We do not speak of crescent years or gibbous hopes. We speak of reigns 1, 2, and 3, or of the long light and the broken light. Accountants balance ledgers in 10-day blocks or in seasons of market winds. Priests count holiness in solstices and equinoxes and the transit of brilliant planets. Sailors write logbooks that hymn the sun's declination and the taste of currents, not the treachery of perigean spring tides. Shipwrights celebrate the coast's calmer moods, then overcorrect, as humans do. Harbors are built closer, wharves longer, and less armored. Traders trust forecasts of wind more than tables of tide. Storm surges still come, weather is the heavyweight in the ring, and some centuries learn the hard way that even small astronomical tides added to large meteorological ones can tell a story with too much water in it. The better harbor masters turn into ethnographers of storm character, writing folk physics that will later be called science. Inlets that amplify waves like trumpets, bays that cradle them like mufflers, shelves that trip them to fall. Tidal mills never blossom into a global technology. Tidal power remains an ingenuity of a few estuaries rather than a column in the energy budget. River deltas shift with different habits, gaining where somewhere else they might lose, because the moon's constant kneading is not there to tug grains of silt seaward in quite the same ways. Civil engineers become poets of sand. Inland agriculture uses cleaner rulers. Sowing dates depend even more fiercely on length of day and soil temperature. The absence of a lunar vocabulary makes farmers more precise about solar ones. Almanacs swell with charts of dawn and dusk, with wind roses, with the sobering pages on frost probabilities. In some regions, because long-term axial wandering sometimes amplifies seasons over geologic time, tradition builds a memory unlike ours. Proverbs that speak of fields turning to grassland for 1,000 years and then back to forest, and of peoples who ride the latitude lines the way others rode the rivers. Most such tales are exaggerations that misremember migrations and famines, but the exaggerations are anchored to truth. A planet without a moon tells longer, more flexible climate stories. Culture, wedded by necessity, learns to keep books across centuries. Biology proceeds by invention. On our Earth, an entire suite of organisms cues behavior to lunar phase. Corals shedding gametes in planetary sync, Pololo worms rising in ribboning feasts, fish and crabs timing life with night silver. Here, the mass cues diversify. Corals prefer sunsets after the year's highest sea surface temperatures, or pick a clock that counts days from the first seasonal storm, or knot their signals to the lengthening dusk. The spectacle remains. A milky snowfall in warm water, a carnival of larvae. Sea turtles, which elsewhere use the moon-bright horizon as a guide, here learn to read the persistent brightness of the surf, or the slope of beach, or the polarization of skylight at dusk. Predators key not to full moon abundance, but to wind-tide confluences and the gentle regularities of solar-driven swell. Fewer animals cram themselves into the same night, more spread their risk across several. The result is not loss, but a different economy of risk and reward. If you listen carefully beneath that economy under reefs and wetlands and mountains, you will hear geophysics speaking in a lower register. The moon's missing gravity means less tidal flexing of the crust and mantle. The difference is subtle. It does not snuff volcanoes or silence faults, but it sands a faint edge off certain triggers. There are winter nights when the loading and unloading of ice and snow on mountain ranges tickles seismic systems. There are days when the weight of storms does the same. Those tickles remain. The moons are simply not added. Hydrothermal systems at spreading ridges breathe with somewhat different timing, because the overlying ocean is kneaded differently. The seafloor vents still ornament abyssal plains with chimneys of sulfide and smoke. Microbes still charter empires there, building metabolisms on gradients and metals. Some of the crust's size are scheduled more by the sun's modest tides and by weather. Others shrink under the absence of a lunar drumbeat. Geology never needed a moon to be restless. It needed heat and time. Astronomy, in the human sense, becomes an earlier vocation for more people. A dark sky every night is an education. Villages keep communal eyepieces in public squares like wells. Children learn Messier catalog numbers like street names. Sailors teach one another the star paths not as emergency skills but as song. In high latitudes, when the aurora walks south on a good night, and here it does so more visibly because nothing bright intrudes, the whole town pours into the snow to watch curtains collapse inward, then tear, then rebuild, as if a cathedral made of silk could simultaneously burn and grow. There are no full moon hikes. There are starfield picnics instead always. The lack of eclipses becomes part of the romance of eclipses, as pure mathematics. Philosophers use them as ideas. Imagine, they say, that the disk of another world could exactly cover the sun. Imagine the terror and the lessons. Imagine the coin of shadow. The thought experiment teaches geometry, patience, the difference between awe and fear. The old alliance between belief and sky shifts without breaking. In our world, 1,000 myths about a pale-faced goddess or a rabbit or a trickster with a stolen lantern find home in the moon. In the moonless world, those myths condense elsewhere, into the evening star, who becomes the patron of departures and returns, into Saturn, whose rings are visible as an oval to modest optics, and thus a natural treasury of metaphors about vow and boundary, into comets, each one stitched into epic as a messenger with a long, luminous tail. Pilgrimages climb equatorial mountains to wait for the year's 2 days when the sun balances at noon, casting shadows into nothing. Holidays of humility before geometry. The moon's vacancy does not evacuate the sacred. It moves it like a river that changes course, leaving a crescent lake to glitter with memory while it carves a new bed. Medicine and folklore must find different scaffolds. Where elsewhere people might tie human cycles to lunar change, here those stories never grow. Sleep research matures with less arguing about silver nights versus black ones. Public health does not schedule night festivals to dodge a bright sky. Love has to work a bit harder in poetry, because an effortless metaphor is not there to be plucked. Poets adapt. They write of breathing shadows, of the hummed electricity of summer insects, of the way the Milky Way looks in high desert air when it is the only highway you can see. Navigation and science grow understories from the same root. No moon means no neat parallax target hanging nearby. Astrometry matures on the backs of stars, planets, and the dance of Jupiter's satellites, still there, still counting time with metronomic enthusiasm. The space age, when it comes, lacks a white beacon to dare dream landings upon, but the appetite for nearness does not disappear. High-altitude balloonists first, then rocketeers aim for orbits and for small asteroids in Earth-like paths. The first human footprints on another world are not stamped into lunar dust, but into the powder of a near-Earth rock the size of a town. It is harder to reach, more delicate to rendezvous with, but the endeavor seizes imaginations precisely because it is harder. Children learn not the names of seas on a neighbor's face, but the catalog designations of tumbling stones. The photographs that come back are not of a blue marble rising over a barren horizon, but of Earth from a distance dotted with continents and weather without a familiar coin keeping it company. The loneliness in those images is different. It invites a particular kind of tenderness. What of extremes? In some epochs, because the tilt is allowed a wider meander, glaciers build a little more greedily. Margins of habitability shift poleward or equatorward by a kingdom's width. People follow rivers the way migratory birds follow isotherms. There are ages of muscular monsoons, ages of stingy ones. There are centuries when donut-shaped deserts ring a band of verdant equator, and others when the deserts pinch and the temperate belts bloom. The long story is survivable. Its pages are edged in adaptation, in diaspora, in the great human art of learning not once, but repeatedly how to live where you live. If you vine that story over maps, you get not collapse after collapse, but pulses, expansions, quietings, reknottings of trade and kinship. Our own history on any earth has always read this way. The moon was never a talisman against hubris or entropy. It was, at best, another rhythm to which the biosphere found steps. Return for a moment to the question of beginnings because every alternate Earth invites you to restage life's first acts. The intertidal hypothesis, beloved in our world because tides are a gorgeous blender, must be rewritten here. The blender exists, but it runs on lower speed. Wet-dry cycles that concentrate molecules can happen at shorelines still. They also happen inland, in hot little ponds fed by volcanic greenhouse gases, or in percolating rock beneath basalt flows, or in desert playas, where seasonal rains are so punctual the ground writes a ledger. Hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean remain compelling theaters, mixing minerals and heat in ways that solve problems without a moon in the script. Life's invention is a combinatorial feast, not a single solemn recipe. Remove a spice and kitchens do not close. They reach for others. Culture, too, finds others. High art without moonlight paints different nights. More stars, more sky texture, more nerve. The visual vocabulary of night in painting and film grows denser because the background is insistently articulate. Listen. Crickets and frogs in humid countries make a sound like braided ropes rubbing. Nocturnal birds cough and trill. The wind plays stone fences like instruments. In winter, the aurora shivers. In desert places, the night breathes like a sleeper, cooling and warming with a tenderness that feels like secret. The moon was an uncomplicated brushstroke, a high-contrast circle. Without it, artists learn more subtle grays, more patient exposures. They make of the dark a book, not a wall. Even language rearranges furniture to accommodate an invisible guest who never RSVP'd. Consider idiom. In our Earth, sayings bloom on lunar soil. Once in a blue moon, many moons ago, honeymoon. Here, luck is star-bought. Once in a belt of Orion, time is meteored, many showers back. Romance is sun-stitched, harvest sun week, golden dusk, the hour when Saturn rises. Songs that elsewhere would have crooned to the full moon croon to the river of the sky instead. Lullabies count satellites of Jupiter. Stories teach children to follow the seasons, not just in their fourfold shape, but in their quality. The season when the high air is especially clear and the mountains look pushed closer by the gods. The season when the ocean's skin hisses with 1,000 tiny combs of wind. There are losses. No lovers carving their names by a light so theatrical it flatters everything. No night sail races set to arrive on a high tide at dawn like miracles. No eclipse chasers weeping in fields. These feel like losses to us because we live inside their presence. But this other Earth has its own chalices. The meteor storms that occur every so many years when the planet knots itself into an old comet trail are screamed about for generations in advance and then watched as if they could cure something. The high deserts that everywhere schoolroom of humility are fuller. Every single night is adequate for seeing as far as eyes and optics allow. Every single night a rehearsal for wonder. A rural child who has never left home knows the shape of galaxy season the way a coastal child knows the smell of tide. Many of the most fascinating changes on a moonless Earth are not the largest. They are the small, lived inversions. A fisherman grows old without ever saying, "The tide will turn after midnight," and instead says, "The wind will turn toward the river mouth by midnight. We will follow." A farmer teaches apprentices to read stems and shadows, not calendars with boxes color-coded by lunar faces. A geographer writes a book about deltas in which entire chapters on the moon's spring neap pulsing are replaced by chapters on trade winds and fluvial stubbornness. A school child, when asked to draw the Earth and its family, draws a sun and a lone blue world with company far away, Mars as a dot, Jupiter as a king with attendants, Saturn as a rumor. The blank where the moon would have been is not frightening. It is an invitation to a longer sentence. Of course, the speculative part of our mind, your mind, right now, keeps sneaking back to where a different history could have pivoted. The origin story. No giant impact by a Mars-sized body, no spray of molten rock into orbit, no coagulation of that spray into a companion. It is neat to imagine a world without the moon, accompanied by a quieter early Earth, fewer ridiculous tides, maybe faster spin for longer, slightly different distribution of angular momentum in the system. It is neat to watch the wheel of what-ifs clatter and slow. Different iron fractions, slightly altered obliquity resonances with the giant planets. But be honest, the most consequential what-ifs are rarely at the scale of rocks colliding. They are at the scale of how animals choose to live under a given sky. In this world, animals choose a little differently, and so do we. So end where you began, on a porch, under a sky unpunctured by a close companion, holding the idea of the moon in your hands the way you'd hold an old photograph of a person you never met but have always been told you resemble. The photograph is beautiful. It glows with the acute nostalgia of things that never happened. You understand why a world with such a neighbor wrote myths about it and flew to it and used it to keep the beat. You do not wish it here. You do not resent it elsewhere. You simply learn again the oldest lesson. The universe is broad and indifferent and generous. It has 1,000 furnaces for making worlds, 1,000 extra ingredients, of which the moon is one. In that generosity, this earth finds not survival but style. It is not a poorer chapter in the library of planets. It is a book with different margins and different lighting, one that asks of its readers a fraction more attention at night and rewards them with a deeper table of contents in the sky. Its seas write softer signatures on the coast, but carve the same hard lessons about risk. Its seasons step a little wider across the page of time, but still keep their meaning. Harvest, hunger, hope. Its cities push back the dark a little earlier and, when they are wise, a little less arrogantly. Its children learn the Milky Way, the way we learn the faces of our loved ones, both in the grand sweep and in the freckles. Its science grows with fewer pauses because the sky never washes itself out. Its art grows with more nuance because the dark is many things. What would Earth be like without the moon? Like a person who never knew an older sibling, shaped by other hands into other competence, quieter at the shore, blacker at night, more various over eons, no less miraculous. You would feel sometimes that you are missing a word, and then you would replace it with 2 or 3, as language does. You would walk home under a star-salted sky and feel more strongly, perhaps, the distance to everything, and that distance would not diminish you. It would scale your awe to the size of the real. You would sleep. You would wake to a day measured not by borrowed light but by your own star. You would go to the sea and put your feet in and hear the same ancient syllable it has always said. In every version of the world, whether the moon is there to coax it or not, come.